I'm just Nick, and this is the Catalinbread Dirty Little Secret Mark II. You like how I do that little sort of... It's because I'm a rock star. Also, I thought I might mention, there's a reason why I let those last chords, often in these demos, I let that last chord decay, so you can hear it. It's not because I'm having some sort of an epiphany or, my inner life is taken over, though that is often the case. It's because I want you to see or hear how the chord decays. There's a reason for that. There are a lot of pedals that seek to capture the sound of a popular type of amplifier, and there are a lot of pedals that do that. But very few of them capture the dynamic response, the feel of a type of amplifier. And often one of the places that lack of dynamic response or lack of a similar dynamic response shows up, one of the places it shows up is in the way a chord decays, because dynamic response with an amplifier that's distorting is largely about how it distorts relative to how you hit the strings. So when you hit the strings softly with an amplifier that's distorting in a pleasing way, it's often quite clean, and then as you begin to hit the strings harder and the signal becomes stronger coming out of the pickups, it begins to distort. Many pedals capture that to some degree, but often when you hit a nice big loud distorted chord, you hear a strange kind of fizziness and granularity on the decay that doesn't sound like an amplifier at all. It sounds like a pedal. Nothing wrong with sounding like a pedal, unless you want to sound like an amplifier. A lot of people like to sound like 70s Marshall amplifiers with good reason, because it's a good sound. It's a really good sound. And it's a very dynamic type of response that goes along with that sound, where you can really get a lot of expressiveness out of your picking and the way that it shifts both the degree of distortion the amp is producing and the timbre of the amp. Now, there was a previous version of this pedal, that's why it's called Mark II. The first version was, I think, one of Catalinbread's most popular pedals, and it certainly gets talked about a lot, and a lot of people use it. This pedal is the result of some very careful listening, which is one of the things that people at Catalinbread seem to do a lot of and do very well. And they kind of honed in a little bit more on the 70s Marshall sound and gave us a little bit more control on the top here in shaping that sound and dialing it in for our rig. Well, what is your rig, you say? Right now, we're plugged directly into a car Rambler. Now, there's a fair amount of cable running, so it's going to be a little dark, but you'll see right away that it's set up with a very clean sound. It's not distorting at all, and it doesn't sound anything like a Marshall. It sounds kind of like a Fender Deluxe Reverb with just a little bit of Tweety butter on top of it. Tweety butter, great on pancakes. Doesn't sound like a Marshall. Turn the pedal on, and even when it's not distorting much, it sounds like a Marshall. It has that upper mid-range sort of punch. Even you can feel it get ready to jump out at you even when I'm picking lightly. It's there, and it also has that kind of sheen over the top that's glassy in a different way from a Fender Blackface amp. I don't really know how to describe it in terms of frequency or dynamic response, but you can hear it. If you play through a Marshall, you know what I'm talking about. And perhaps as important as all of those other characteristics, it has that low-end thump. Thump. It keeps that solidity even as it begins to break up and I'm really hitting the low strings hard. The beauty of it is I don't have to haul around a big ass 50-watt Marshall head and a 412. I don't want to. Never did. Kind of would like to play through one sometimes, and every now and then I get a chance to, but don't want to carry it around. Just don't want to. So let's take a look at the controls real quick, okay? We have a master volume, which is basically the overall output volume. We have a preamp volume, which will determine how much distortion and also to some degree how the dynamic response to the pedal sort of feels. And we have a presence knob to dial in the amount of brightness and sheen we want, and we have a fullness knob, which is really your low-end cabinet thump, as Catalinbread describes it on their site. Let's just look at some extreme settings to get a sense of the range of these controls. I'm going to turn the preamp volume way down and the master up a little bit, and I'll just put fullness and presence flat. Go back to the clean sound real quick for reference. Turn on the pedal. I already told you why I do that, because it sounds really good and it tells you something about the pedal. It does. It does. So we're already getting a little bit of distortion, even with the preamp control turned pretty far down, but the overall tonality of the amp has changed radically, and in a way that in no way sounds layered or sounds artificial. I mean, I hate to use that term. You know, all amplification is kind of artificial in a sense. It's not, you know, an acoustic sound. Well, what's coming out of the amp? See, I'm just backing myself into a corner. I'm not thinking clearly today. I don't know if I've had too much espresso, not enough espresso. It's always so. Crank preamp gain all the way up. Let's see what that sounds like. Sounds like a crank Marshall. Back off the volume control on the guitar. Now, what's cool about that, of course, it cleans up beautifully. It cleans up linearly. It's highly usable, the way that your volume control interacts with the pedal. But what's kind of cool about it is when I roll back the volume on the guitar, guess what? It sounds kind of like when I have the volume at full on the guitar, but have the preamp control turned down. So there's a kind of coherence or consistency to this pedal that also reminds one of an amp. That the general tonal characteristics of it stay the same regardless of where you set the controls. There's a range there, but it all sounds like the Marshall. That's what we're trying to do here. Okay, let's go back to just a middle 12 o'clock setting on the master and the preamp, and let's play with these presence and fullness controls here. Let's see here. Let's set at 12 o'clock, turn the presence all the way up. It's usable, it's subtle, it doesn't turn into some sort of ear-splitting nastiness. If we want ear-splitting nastiness or even a lot more treble, we just turn up the treble control on the amp. Okay? This is for dialing in the subtleties. Just dialing in that last little bit, and I think this is a lot of what happened when they developed the Mark II, is they thought about, well, you know, how can we add a range of control here on the high end and the low end that will allow somebody to plug this thing into their rig and just make the subtle adjustments that they can't do with the amp's tone controls to make this thing sound exactly, indistinguishably like a Marshall. Roll it off a little bit. Maybe if we were plugged into, you know, a Princeton or Deluxe Reverb or Twin, we need to roll that off just a little bit, just to get rid of a little bit of the glass. Let's try the thumpy control. We're going to go full to the top with the fullness control. It's not over compressing. It's not, you know, booming and overpowering everything else. It's subtle. It's subtle. Just gives you enough to dial the sound in to sound, I hate the word authentic. It's authentic, but I'm going to use it anyway. Authentic. All right, now, finally, the true test of any pedal that seeks to sound like an amplifier is what happens when you put a pedal in front of it. Does it sound like two distortion devices fighting, like rabid squirrels? Or does it sound like a fuzz pedal, like the fabulous Catalinbread Manx plugged into a Marshall? Well, we're about to find out. Now, just for reference, let's see what the Manx sounds like by itself, okay? We have it set everything at 12 o'clock except the levels turned down a little bit. The Manx, if you're not familiar with it, is a really, really great muff style fuzz. This pedal is going to be a challenge for any other distortion device. I don't care what you say. It's a beautifully voiced pedal. There's a lot of control with the high and low EQ, treble, bass, whatever they have written on the front. But when you start introducing that much clipping in the signal and you put it into another distortion device, often it's the case that it's going to just compress like crazy, get kind of muddy and weird. There's going to be weird artifacts. We're about to find out if that is going to be the case with the dirty little secret, with everything set at 12 o'clock. Okay? So plain vanilla position, okay? Okay, well, if you've ever plugged a muff style fuzz into a, you know, sort of slightly distorting or moderately distorting Marshall, you know that what happens is you get this amazing thickness and singing from the fuzz, but the Marshall kind of tightens it up and gives it some cut, and it's a great friggin' sound. But I gotta tell you, often it doesn't sound as good as this, and doesn't respond as consistently and as usably as this combination. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm always honest with you. This is actually the first time I plugged these two pedals in together. It is. And I can tell you I'm going to be doing a lot more, and, you know, I wasn't entirely sure it was going to happen, but I trust these motherfuckers. When they say they're building a pedal that responds well to stacking, I believe them, and this further confirms my faith. There's really not that much else to say. Get a hold of the folks at Rock and Roll Vintage. They will hook you up, and, you know, it's almost superfluous to add that the DLS Mark II has earned the coveted Delft cowl. Until next time.